So thanks for having me here. And I'm Nils Markusson, and I was talking about the project up at Lancaster University about delivering greenhouse gas removals without undermining mitigation. The contributors are listed on the slide there. I should especially mention Duncan, hand up please, as came up with the idea for the project and has done a lot of the work in it, but the rest of us contributed as well. So what is it about then? So we were worried about the risk that deploying or even just proposing greenhouse gas removal could undermine other mitigation efforts, emissions reductions. And when you do research on this topic, you quite often, or sometimes at least, get accused of being against GGR, trying to undermine GGR, but that's not actually what we're doing. We are concerned about the real risk, and we are trying to find ways, have been trying to find ways of countering those. So we did a couple of things, and I've got 5 minutes, so there'll be a few things. Duncan looked into the modeling literature and came up with two things: a topology for the kind of mechanisms that could lead to mitigation deterrence from GGR, and also a first quantification of the scale of the problem. So we have three types here. The first one is where there is some substitution happens, slightly lower emissions reductions ambitions for some GGR ambitions, but then the GGR efforts fail in one way or another. It could happen in many different ways, but for example, if the CO2 gets diverted into carbon utilization in ways that doesn't really sequester the CO2. The second type is, again, where there is some substitution happening, but there are unintended side effects from the GGR project that lead to increased emissions. So that could be some of those indirect land use changes we've already heard about. And thirdly, and this is the third mechanism, and this is where we get closer to the language of moral hazard that you've also heard about, is where there are over-optimistic assessments, intentionally or unintentionally, of the GGR potential. Where the ambitions for doing that kind of substitutions are just plain too high. And we can, if we put our minds to it, probably think about examples of that, right? So this analysis also then produced a quantification. So we came up with a central estimate of roughly 500 billion tons of carbon at risk, as we called it, of mitigation deterrence, which would imply an additional 0.7 degrees of warming, assuming a median estimate of climate sensitivity. So that's the first estimate. There's been some modeling work since. We need more. So we also, drawing on our social science understanding of technology, conceptualized mitigation deterrence as not just an engineering problem. It is, but it's not just that. It's also not just a moral problem of the actors involved, say fossil fuel companies, suddenly acting more benevolently, but it is the social problems. It depends a lot on the specific social, cultural, economic context, etc. So to study this, we designed workshops with stakeholders. Some of you are in the audience here, thank you very much. And we discussed there how GGR might fare under different assumptions about what society might be like over time, culturally, politically, etc. The four main scenario variants are on the screen here. The key result, lots of results from that, but the key result was that participants broadly agreed about the plausibility of the existence of mitigation deterrence type effects in the scenarios. And they tended to agree more and more as the workshop discussions progressed. So we take this as some confirmation that there is a plausible problem here, and that it is quite robust under different assumptions about egalitarian society, authoritarian societies, neoliberal societies, etc. Although mitigation deterrence might play out a bit differently in different scenarios. So, problem-solving mode. Lots of recommendations. The key idea to take away from that is a principle of separation. To have separate targets for emissions reductions and for negative emissions. Separate targets, separate accounting for that, to try to at least be aware of how much substitution is going on and where it does and doesn't work. We want to see dedicated support for GGR as well, so not just rely on generic policy instruments like and we are also relatively skeptical ended up being quite skeptical about emissions trading, so to throw GGR into a general emissions trading system. Trading maybe, but possibly done separately from emissions reductions. We did a fair bit of engagement and dissemination as well. I would say that my impression is that there is quite a high degree of awareness now that this is an issue, that this is a concern that needs to be taken seriously. I think there's relatively low consensus about what mitigation deterrence is and how it might work, etc. But that's so the debate and the research needs to go on about that one. And here's the list of outputs that we're quite proud of. So thank you very much.